Thanks very much. Can I just say, well done, particularly to Greg and the Mid-Central team. I think it would have been very difficult to stand up here and talk about scores of zero, but hats off. That does take courage, and as you say, first step in solving a problem is actually acknowledging the problem, so awesome work. Bit of a change of pace. Wanted to talk to you and invite you to join me on a road trip. It's not the most exciting road trip you might ever go on, Auckland to Hamilton, but seeing that I do live in Auckland and this year's HINS conference is in Hamilton, I thought it was appropriate to use it as a bit of a metaphor on a journey we all need to go on. As with any road trip I sort of undertake, I like to plan things to the nth degree. So we're going to be utilizing 3 checkpoints on this road trip. And as I said, this road trip to me symbolizes the journey we as a system need to go on around moving to become a truly consumer-centered system. Because if we think about our starting point around being consumer-centered, this is probably as good as we've currently got it. And as Greg and the team have said, first step in solving a problem is actually acknowledging that you've got one. In fact, I think we've got this so wrong. The language we use is in itself problematic. So that word patient is derived from a Latin word, patai, which means to suffer or suffering. And the fact that we still utilize language and nomenclature like that, as I say, is in itself problematic. In no other facet of our lives would we have a word or a label associated with ourselves that has connotations like this. So, back to this road trip, back to this journey. Let's go on it together. We want to move from being a patient to actually becoming a consumer. We want to move from being a very provider-focused system to a consumer-focused system. And as I said, 3 checkpoints along the way. First one is about gaining insight into our own thinking and our own actions and our behaviors. Second one is going to be about empowering our teams to actually make change. And the third one is going to be about using digital health to try and drive some of this change. So the journey's going well so far. As I said, I'm a meticulous planner. So we're up to Pokeno, famous for its bacon. And it's important that we do stop to smell the bacon, because I would like to share a story about one of our consumers. So this is Jack's story. Jack was a man in his mid-50s, lived up in Kerikeri. Unfortunately, he received a life-changing diagnosis as he entered our system. Jack had a fairly advanced head and neck cancer. Over the next few months of Jack's life, we subjected him to many different things. We told him, okay, on this day you're going to need to drive down from Kerikeri to Auckland so you can have a scan, see this specialist, talk to the speech language therapist, then you can go back up to Kerikeri. But by the way, you need to come down next week and come and spend some more time with us. Jack had things stuck into his nose, his mouth, etc. Had big surgery with us, multiple scans. And unfortunately, the story didn't end well for Jack, so Jack is no longer with us. But in those last few weeks of Jack's life, Jack wrote us a letter. And Jack wrote us a letter to tell us about what was important to him. So we robbed Jack of a few different things in the last few months of his life. We robbed him of time. We robbed him of the ability to communicate effectively, because we did big surgery on him, so to communicate effectively with his family and friends. We robbed him for a period of time of the ability to eat. And in this letter, he told us about the things that were actually important to him. One was time, because he had very little of it left. Second thing was being able to actually share stories and conversations with his family and his friends, and he wasn't able to do that effectively. So this, to me, sort of at a very individual level highlighted how provider-centric we actually as a system are. We failed to ask Jack what was important to you. Just coming up a level, so at a more sort of macro level, this is some data from the Health Quality and Safety Commission. Out of 21 questions that we ask our consumers in the system, there is one question, yes, one, where we ask a question about whether our interaction or engagement with you has had a focus on what is important to you. So just looking at that again, did the specialist doctor ask you what is important to you? Our results here is in around 50% of cases, we don't even bother to ask. So that's problematic. We've been talking about being consumer-centered for decades. Our actions and our behaviors would demonstrate that we are not. We've got to own that. We've got to acknowledge that. There are some very good reasons driving provider-centric behavior, but they are not reasons we can afford to sustain if we are to become truly consumer-centered. How do we change that? Let's go out and talk to our patients. And then let's actually listen to what they are saying. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that word. Let's go out and talk to our consumers. And let's listen to what they're actually saying and then apply some of those principles and those actions to make things different for them. So checkpoint number 2, I want to share a story about Carrie. So Carrie is one of our call center team, our awesome call center team at Mercy Radiology and Clinics. Carrie has become the product owner for an online booking system we've implemented over the last few months. She is literally the product owner. She does have executive support, so our Director of Strategic Programs looks after it from an executive sponsor perspective. But Carrie is the person that has picked this initiative up and driven it through the organization because we had some real barriers to being able to implement a solution like this. And through these discussions with the organization, a number of common themes sort of came out. We are incredibly paternalistic when it comes to how we think about the delivery of care. So some of the responses before we actually implemented this from our teams were, consumers aren't smart enough to be able to select the right scan. They're going to forget to upload a referral. So we'll be chasing our tails in terms of actually having the clinical information we need to be able to book them in correctly. This is going to take us more time. This is going to make my life more difficult. And admittedly, our organization has been on a path where we have implemented quite a number of projects, so there has been an element of change fatigue inside of the organization. All of these, though, were barriers that Carrie figured out a way to address and overcome. So when we got down to it and actually focused on delivering something that was consumer-centered, Carrie was able to drive the program through, and we've been seeing some excellent results, which I'll share with you a little bit later on. So this is about empowering our teams. I did a personality test very recently, and in terms of my own leadership journey, I came out as an active controller. That's my personality type. So the need to give power away or control away actually comes at a very difficult price for me. But giving Carrie the power to actually go out and make the changes she needed to make to drive this program through has been why this has been so successful. Part of that was also around democratizing data, so actually being open to sharing our performance and our results with our teams at all levels, because we found that all of this actually builds trust and gives the teams permission to go out and try things, get some things wrong, but actually drive change through. So we're tracking really well. Our last stop is in Huntley, that metropolis just outside of Hamilton. And here I want to talk to you about patient-reported experience measures and our online booking system. So this is where the digital health, the digital approaches come in terms of enabling consumer-centered care. So we got some great feedback from one of our patients. His name was Mike. Mike, in fact, had a conversation with me and he said, look, I can't fault the care I got when I actually was able to get into your facility. The team was excellent. But the fact that I had to spend 10 minutes on a phone call in a queue waiting to be able to make my booking in 2018 is just absolutely ridiculous. And we said, you know, that's a fair enough point, Mike. We're probably going to do something about that. But just before I talk about what we actually did about that, one of the other things we've done is industrialized our approach to collecting feedback from patients. And one of the other important points around deploying digital health solutions is the partnerships you need to develop to be able to do this. So one of our partners is Simplicity. They've got a stand here at the conference. Would encourage you to go out and see them. And Simplicity have enabled us to deliver this patient-reported experience measure program, which is, in my view, second to none. The reason it's been so effective is because Simplicity came to the table with some very good knowledge and a really good team. So we were doing patient experience reporting before Simplicity entered the equation. We were doing it badly. Simplicity told us when we presented them with our original questionnaire, with some feedback on that questionnaire, they said, yeah, you could keep going with what you're doing, or you could try something different. We elected to go with the experts in this and tried something different. And the insights we are generating and gathering through this approach are phenomenal. This is what drives most of the quality improvement inside of our organization now, feedback from our consumers. So as I said, Mike's feedback to us was, why can't I book my scan online? Contrast that to Sue's experience a few months ago, which was completely different. Sue actually took the time to write back to us in our patient-reported experience measure and said, my booking experience with you guys was phenomenal. I was on a ferry, I was with my kids at the time, I could jump onto my phone, and I had my appointment booked in 4 clicks or 4 touches of my screen. So we've worked with an organization called Akeso. They're also here at the conference today to deploy this online booking system. We're the first radiology provider in private to actually do this. But there's nothing stopping us again as a system from adopting technology like this and solutions and approaches like this. So you can see when we hark back to some of those paternalistic views the organization had, actually most people would be able to use an interface like this to select the scan they need. Make it easy for the consumer, and they're probably going to get it right. The impact has been phenomenal. So we get around 150 online bookings a week. 95% of those come with the referral attached. Around half of those are made on mobile devices. Interestingly, around 60% of the bookings are made during sort of working hours, but an important An important factor also there is that 40% are made outside of normal working hours. Another bit of feedback we had from the organization was older people are going to struggle with this stuff. A quarter of our bookings come from people over 50. My chief operating officer said, make sure you tell this story as well. We've had a nearly 20% reduction in inbound calls to our call center, but what we've seen over the last 3 months, because that's how long the solution's been in place for, is a 30% increase in overall activity for the organization. So just on that concept of partnership, again in the digital health space, procurement is something we've traditionally not done that well in healthcare. It's not been an enabler in the digital space. And there are a number of reasons for that, and I think there's certainly some issues we need to address in that space. Our procurement methodology for this was very different. So traditionally we've gone with big bets, heavy investment upfront, support and maintenance contracts. Our partners really came to the table here, so Akeso and Simplicity. And the model we've actually used to contract these solutions is one of a risk share. So what do I mean by that? With the Akeso example, Akeso get paid on the basis of the number of scans that are booked through the online booking system. So we have tied Akeso's success to our success, because the more people book, the better for us, and the more people book, the better for Akeso. So I think it's important for us to change our approach to procurement and our thinking around procurement. Most of the kind of new generation of vendors out there are open to contracting models like this. The other good thing about this model of deployment, so using a SaaS-based model, is we've been able to take that feedback on board from our consumers and iterate. So the solution as it stands this week is different to the solution as it was 2 weeks ago. And again, we've entered into agreements with partners who are actually willing to invest in enhancing their product and their platform. So again, remember, that whole contract construct is one that ties their success to ours in terms of utilization of the application and the system. So it is possible to use reasonably simple digital tools and a partnership approach with our industry partners to drive a consumer-centered model in healthcare. We've got to change our procurement approach, and I think some of the rules around how we procure currently don't enable a flexible approach. And in terms of the way we deploy these solutions, there are flexible models available now that allow us to iterate and enhance on what we know to improve that experience for consumers as we move forward. So thank you for bearing with me. We've made it to Hamilton, the city of the future. This is a journey that obviously isn't over for us as an organization and as a system, but collectively for us as well. I think we're back in Hamilton next year and then probably off to Christchurch the year thereafter. There is an opportunity for us to truly shift to becoming a consumer-centered system, but we need to stop paying lip service to it. So just to wrap up, the journey for us has been interesting so far. Those 3 checkpoints is around acknowledging that we aren't consumer-centered and actually taking steps to doing something about that. That frontline empowerment is so critical to actually driving change within our organizations. And digital health approaches, both in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the way we deploy these solutions and how we procure them, will help us to become more consumer-centered. So in terms of that evolution from patient to consumer, it is possible. It's happening in nearly every other facet of our lives. It needs to happen in healthcare. And so it is about shifting from this paradigm, as Eric Topol writes about, to this paradigm where the consumer is really a true partner in the delivery of their care. And I'll just leave you with some wise words from Maureen Bisignano. This is about flipping healthcare from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. And that's when we really get that partnership model going. And there are tremendous benefits for our whole system and for our consumers if we can get this right. Thank you.
Lloyd McCain. Thank you, Lloyd. We've got the opportunity now to ask Lloyd questions, and you can jump onto Slido, popping in the password HINS2019. Otherwise, we've got Tito on a catch box. So if you've got a question for Lloyd, yeah, pop your hand up there.
Thanks, Lloyd. That was a great presentation. Just a quick question, a couple of quick questions. We talk about empowering our workforce, but how do we empower consumers through greater digital literacy and social license so they have conversations that matter to them or know the right questions they should be asking their healthcare providers in this space?
That's a great question. I think the fact that we're asking that question is probably more evidence that we haven't really got very far on the shift to actually becoming consumer-centered in the first place. So look, I think there's not a single strategy or single approach to enabling that consumer empowerment. What I think we need to get better at in health is leveraging how people are learning and applying digital and the use of digital in other facets of their lives to health. So one of the interesting things, if I hop back to kind of my organizational context, is just some of the perceptions and perhaps incorrect perceptions and assumptions we have about consumer behavior and consumer capability. And so utilizing some of our own data to dispel some of those myths is a good starting point. But yeah, I guess at a national, at a community level, we need to be more deliberate in terms of enabling, educating, and empowering people to actually utilize approaches and concepts like this.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If you're traveling in, here I am.
Thank you.
If you're traveling, if you're coming to the conference next year, to the City of the Future, how would you run this conference better so that it actually includes consumer participation? And I say that because I think I'm one of the few consumers who's here.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question and an important question. I guess we all, everyone in the room has a responsibility and the ability to change the way we invite and engage consumers. So part of that is probably actually about getting the message about HINS and what HINS does out, to Nick's point, more broadly and more widely than just our clinical DHB, PHO communities. because I think people like yourself have an interest in this because it affects us all as consumers. And perhaps we could do something simpler, like kind of at a grassroots level, where everybody in the room who probably themselves is a consumer of health service might need to bring a consumer along, somebody that doesn't necessarily work within the sector as well. And it's probably also about getting some consumer engagement in terms of the tracks, so all of the different sessions that are run, and involving consumers in the organization of the conference itself. So that's a conversation I think we need to have, and let's make it happen. We've got to take some steps to get it started. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lloyd McCain.